Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We'll slowly start the session, just waiting for everyone to arrive. So numbers have stabilized, and I guess we should get going. So this is the last special session of this meeting, and it's the CLIMAAX project, Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Framework and Toolbox, that's hosting you. Welcome to our meeting. So I'm Anna Pirani. I'm working with the IPCC Working Group 1 until this July, and I've also just recently joined the Risk and Adaptation Strategies group at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, CMCC, and it's Pirani. I have a funny typo there in my name. I'll be co-hosting with Jeremy, so over to Jeremy.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Jeremy Powell. I'm also from CMCC in the Risk Assessment and Adaptation Strategies Division. Welcome, everyone, and I hope you enjoy our program. Over to you, Anna.
Yes, so you see ahead of you, in front of you, the agenda. But before we get started and us introducing the program in more detail, we would like to start with the interactive bit or an interactive bit straight away. So you've seen the Menti tool many times these days. If you could try to reach our Menti survey. So the idea here at the start is to find out more about who's joined us in this discussion. So the first question is just asking you to which type of group you belong to, whether you're coming from research and innovation, public authority, climate service provider, maybe you come from the general public, or civil society organization, or perhaps business, maybe other things as well. So let's see who we've got in the room. So just a few people have responded, so I'm not going to start commenting yet. Got a third of the responses who keep answering. But it looks like we may be stabilizing, and it's very nice to see that we've hit all of these categories. No one from the general public. Most are coming from research and innovation and climate service providers. It's interesting to see different user groups as well, different stakeholder groups joining the meeting. And we have some others. So we're curious to know who you are, like how you describe yourself. So if you want to write something in the chat box, we have someone from the general public. But feel free to message where you're coming from, what type of group. It's interesting to see who we are. So maybe we could go to the next question. We have some connection issues. Do you want to move on, Jeremy, if it works?
I'm trying to advance the slide, but it's not moving.
I think it's interesting for our guest speakers as well to know what kind of audience we have. So we have a plan B if it didn't work. Here we go. And this question is hasn't been asked in other sessions. So it's interesting to see at what scales you're working at, because as you'll find out, CLIMAAX is working across various scales, particularly national, regional, city level, and also at the lower level and that community level. But we interact directly with the European level. So here we are, we can see at what scales we have in our practices. So many people working at the European scale and at the national level. Okay, thank you very much. That was nice to see who's in the room. So over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, let me just escape out and then redo the slide. Okay, thank you for participating in the Mentimeter. That information is quite useful for us, and it's we hope that this session will be interactive and that participants will engage in the question and answer sessions throughout the program we have today. Now that we know more about you and the groups and the scales that you represent, we'd like to start off with saying something about the EU mission on climate change adaptation. Many of you know in February 2021, about 2 years ago, the European Commission adopted a strategy that sets out how the EU can adapt to the unavoidable impacts of climate change and become climate resilient by 2050. To accomplish this strategy, an EU mission on climate change adaptation was formed with 3 specific objectives. The first objective was to support European regions and communities in preparing and planning for climate resilience. The second is to accelerate transformations towards a climate resilient future by supporting at least 150 regions and communities in the co-creation of innovation pathways and testing of solutions. The third and final specific objective is to deliver at least 75 demonstrations of systemic transformations to climate resilience across Europe. CLIMAAX is one of the projects launched as part of this mission. It fits under the first mission's objective, which is to support European regions and communities in preparing and planning for climate resilience. So let's move on to an overview of the CLIMAAX project. We're very fortunate to have here with us Bart van den Hurk, who is the lead coordinator of CLIMAAX, and of course he's the best person to describe this project. Bart is a senior climate advisor at Deltars, which is a research institute in the Netherlands, in Delft, and he has a professor affiliation at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, or VU Amsterdam. He has a wealth of knowledge in the field of weather and climate, and his current work focuses on generating climate information to support societal adaptation processes. He's also a lead author of the Atlas of the IPCC Working Group 1 6 Assessment Report. Bart, can you tell us what the CLIMAAX project is about? And in particular, can you say something about its scope and objectives, its expected outcomes and impact, and how it is important for the mission adaptation? Before I hand you the microphone, we'd like to encourage the audience to post questions and comments. You can do that by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The chat will just reserve for posting specific websites and things like that, so just use the Q&A button. Over to you, Bart.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeremy and Anna, for putting together this session and inviting CLIMAAX. Yes, I will address your questions on what CLIMAAX is going to deliver. You already introduced the missions on climate adaptation and the more operational Green Deal that is coming out of that, of course. And yeah, the research program that goes with it had a special call to support the mission last year. And in that call, there were each of these segments, if you like, of the missions were asked to submit project proposals. I think a very novel thing of this mission is that it really is addressing regions. It really wants to make a difference at the place where the difference needs to be made, and that is where the decisions have been taken, and that is where the people live that do experience impacts of climate change and do need to prepare for different changing conditions and increasing pressures from all kinds of sides. And that regional orientation is really embedded in the whole mission call. And I've been working on several of these European projects before in climate risk assessment and climate modeling or climate services, whatever. But this regional call is really specific for this generation of a project, and it's also very challenging to not only depict the general picture of what's going on with that big climate system, but to also go down to the regional scale to see what the kind of information is that is really needed at that level. And so, yeah, and CLIMAAX is preparing for that. And as you indeed indicated in your slide, Jeremy, that CLIMAAX is indeed focusing on this orange bench. And we also do interact with projects that are funded that are more, say, in the mid range of this diagram. And so we do cooperate with the projects that will help regions to develop policy pathways, for instance. So there's a close alignment. But let's focus on this climate risk assessment. That is what we do. So it's about doing a stock take of what's going on. And of course, I was involved in the IPCC report and produced that atlas where we already made a very for IPCC jargon, a very regional picture of what climate change is about. But the regions in the climate atlas from IPCC are still, say, subcontinental. So the entire Mediterranean is in IPCC sense is one region. And already there it was quite difficult to get a picture of the specific climate features that go about in that region. Now we have to go down to a much finer scale, so to say, and then we definitely realize how many different activities are going on, and how many different climate features are going on, and all these environmental challenges, these climate challenges, they need to be incorporated in that risk assessment. It's a very multivariate kind of activity. Yeah, there's many regions. The project will cater for at least 60 or so in that order of magnitude, and you can also figure out from spatial distribution how different the regions will be, but also from cultural backgrounds or from whether it's a rural or an urban area where there is a lot of tourism or a lot of heavy industry. All kinds of specific characterizations of these regions make that it is a very heterogeneous, say, landscape that we need to service, which is a nice challenge for this project. Likewise, we will definitely encounter very different availabilities of information at a local scale. In some regions, there is definitely going to be sophisticated, high resolution, high quality, long duration time series of whatever kind of variables that relate to climate risk, from climate meteorological, but also from population exposure or economy. In other regions, there is much less of information available, and we need to rely on, say, continental scale cross products that are produced, and preferably we should look for a mixture of these data sources. And another very interesting thing on this project is, and that was also in the call, is that it is not only supporting climate adaptation as, say, an entity or a policy domain that is thinking about how is the climate in 2050 or beyond looking like, and how does that affect our spatial planning or water management or whatever. No, it's also at a very basic level of emergency response that is already acting today, where we need to bring pictures. What is, say, the shift in climatic features that will also change the practice and the strategic planning of civil protection, for instance. So we have a lot of civil protection thinking in the consortium and also in the set of regions, and that gives it a very diverse palette of activities, and that is also what we defined as our motto at the kickoff, that we need to sort of standardize flexibility in a way, because we do want to give a coherent toolbox and a coherent framework for this risk assessment, yet appreciating the vast variability. So we have a couple of, the project is designed along three basic pillars. The first one is that we want to generate a framework from existing experience, of course. I'll come to that in a minute. That can be used as a template for doing climate risk assessment at a regional scale. We obviously want to provide support tools and that can be things like data portals or access to model archives. But it's also about a help desk or guidelines on how to interpret the different sources of information, whatever. And in that toolbox, we will also prototype that toolbox by doing a couple of up to 5 pilot regions within the project before we open up the call for the outside world. So and so we will test the toolbox and the framework internally. Yeah, and then the third pillar of the project is a fund. We have a 12 million budget received from the European Commission that we will disperse to around 60 regions in Europe to support them to carry out that risk assessment. Yeah, on the framework, we will design a framework that incorporates a main principles of what the risk assessment is for, what the purposes are, what are, say, the application domains, what kind of policy domains, but as I said, also where it links to civil protection, for instance. And we will do a big inventory of current practice. And so this presentation also is a call for anyone here in the audience and to spread the word, to participate in bringing in your evidence of your information that can help us to shape that framework. As we said, we want to standardize flexibility and we want to gather as much as flexibility as we can. In that framework, we will also make a guideline for what is, say, typical tools and typical approaches, typical procedures. And that is used, but starting, of course, with a definition of what the risk assessment is about, what is the spatial scope, what is the timeline scope, for what kind of policy domains do you want to do it. So we help you to systemize the whole structuring of the execution and purpose of the risk assessment. Yeah, and a lot of practical guidance about interpretation, about maybe technical assessments with data, with blending different data sets, that kind of thing. But also to look at a risk assessment from different angles that we can make, for instance, climate scenario kind of risk elements, but we can also zoom in on what the implications would be to the response to an individual event. Those are different viewpoints for that risk assessment, and that we will also provide guidance to help you to go there. On the toolbox, yeah, that is say what we will offer is a basic set of layers that allow you to generate a risk assessment. And the layers, of course, include climate information, hazard information, hydrometeorological information, but it also includes exposure information, distribution of populations, sectoral distributions, and vulnerability information about damage curves or cost pictures of sectoral sectors, that kind of things. And we have already a good interaction with the Risk Data Hub from the Joint Research Center. They also have a portal with a lot of information there and also tools to create risk assessments. And we will make sure that those tools will be aligned. There's a bit of technical support. We will generate a working bench where you can do some simple calculations or can look at pre-calculated features from different perspectives. Maybe even upload your own data to expose them to a set of standardized procedures. So, and that's sort of an shielded area for to work for your own risk assessment. And we have a help desk open that is able to supply or to provide you with support. And as I briefly indicated, we will run the whole system risk assessment with 5 internal pilots. Including a pilot in Latvia. We have in the panel discussion one member from that pilot, and she will probably be witnessing on what is, say, the challenge over there and how a toolbox like this or a CRA support like this, how that indeed can support a region or a country like Latvia. Yeah, and then finally the fund. We will we commit to provide fund to at least 50 regions. We hope that it can be a bit more, and we hope that the number of applications will be even more. Yeah, because there will probably be a bit of competition there. We do set out criteria to apply at an individual level. So we do target specific regions and communities that have some legal basis and have a well-defined reference organizational structure where a risk assessment can be used for. But we also have a criteria for the portfolio of regions that we support. We don't want them all to be, in one country in an area that is already well serviced. We really want to have it distributed. We also want to cover part of the diversity in environmental challenges. So we will open up the fund in 2 calls, where after the first call we can see whether that portfolio is indeed well covered in the first batch, and if not, we can adjust the call for a second round to fill up the gaps in that portfolio. It's going to be a formal procedure, so there will be a formal call out with a call text and guidelines for application, criteria, etc. There will be a formal selection procedure, partly done internally in the consortium for, say, technical feasibility, but we also have an external committee that will do an evaluation. And for instance, the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism is foreseen to play a role in the final sort of approval of the selection that we make, to at least have an external organization engaged in that selection. Yeah, and I will show a short timeline of the call in a minute. But first, indeed, what we call the call for evidence. We really invite you and your colleagues, etc., to give us information that can help us to shape that framework. Please think about, from your regional perspective, what is your current state of the art with climate risk assessments? What is your history? How is it embedded in governance, or in how do stakeholders, sectoral players play a role? What kind of information is being used? So sharing the current practices, good practices, bad practices, really helps us to shape up what is then a feasible framework for it. Also, diversity in the purpose of a risk assessment, diversity in, say, the political landscape or the governance landscape, at what level the risk assessments do play a role. It's really helpful to shape that framework, and all kinds of literature, from also grey literature, or if you have the policy documents we can translate any European language into our working language. It's really welcome to receive, and we are opening an email address and a website that I'll post in a minute. Yeah, and after that call for evidence, we also like to keep engaging with the community of practices that are around. We have quite a few so-called communities of practice around. Also, the Climate for Europe U2 project has a community of practice, and of course, recently there was this big charter closed by the emission platform, where more than 300 regions already have shown interest and committed to take part in this whole, and that can be a channel to participate. But we will also open up for other forms of interaction. So we will organize gatherings and meetups. We will organize written review sections on that framework, and so really hope that and have the ambition to keep in close contact to a large group of potential stakeholders for this utility. Yeah, and then finally the cascading fund. The first call will open in October this year, and it will open for, I think, 2 months, so somewhere mid-October, mid-December. And the selection of that first call should be done by a few months later, February, after that one. And yeah, during the selection process, we will open up the second call. So in January, the second call will open, and that will close then again 2 months later, say March next year. And that also will take 1 or 2 months for the full selection. And yeah, we will anticipate that all the contracts for these risk assessments are signed after summer of 2024. So that's a bit of time ahead, but it allows you to prepare already for this. Yeah, and then there is not a fixed deadline for the length of these risk assessment, but we do want them to close up well before the end of the project, so about 2 years. Yes, I'm closing up here. So this is some contact info. So the website just got live today, the top one, the call for evidence one. So if you have something to share, please go there. And also the email addresses that are here that can be reached to and will be answered. Thank you for giving me the floor for this advertisement.
Thanks very much, Bart. That was a really nice overview of the project. And we have to keep an eye on time, but it would be nice just to take advantage of your overview to ask you a couple of questions. And the first one is a question I actually had, which builds on what we've heard on various sessions today, especially when we've had the interactive moments with participants via Mentimeter and so on. It seems that there's always still this challenge of uptake and really implementing in transversely climate services. And I'm wondering whether you could say something about how a project like CLIMAAX and through the climate risk assessment approach could help bridge that gap where it exists.
Yes, that's a good question. I think the structure of setting up a call and provide financial support and leaving it actually to the potential client to arrange the risk assessment itself is a way to promote uptake by following, say, domestic habits or principles or rules. We typically expect that, say, a region like a province or a big municipality will apply for the funds, but with the fund will recruit a consultancy agent or a technical agent or a knowledge institute or some consultancy they work with to carry out the risk assessment. And we rely that on say close working relationship between the entity, the group that is asking for the risk assessment and the entity that is producing it. That close relationship that should indeed ensure uptake. And so we don't want to, as a core project with like 10 institutes from Europe, we are not the ones that do the risk assessment. It's actually the local consultants that will do. And that middle layer, that is also my experience in my own country, in the Netherlands, that middle layer is actually the crucial interface between, say, the knowledge on one hand and the data products on one hand, and the mostly governmental clients on the other. These consulting firms, they are the best way to know what's going on and what's available. You're muted, Anna. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I was saying thanks for that. And just to say, we have a couple of questions in the box. We are a little bit short on time, but there is one question that I wanted to pick up on. And it's whether we need another climate risk assessment framework. It's branded the climate risk assessment framework in the presentation you gave. And Luca in the chat is saying that we already have a standard ISO on adaptation to climate change, guidelines on vulnerability, impacts and risk assessment. Do you want to comment on this? Do we need this, or what's missing? Yeah.
Well, in fact, we do have in the project a work package that will elaborate on the current ISO thing. So we do see whether there's an update is needed. But these ISOs, they are pretty generic. They prescribe sort of the rules of how the rules that you have to tick mark before the risk assessment is done. I think the framework that we make here is also a very practical guideline. An ISO doesn't say that you could use these and these and these climate projections, for instance, and ours could. That there is some added value if your climate information, for instance, is coming from a generic repository that is acknowledged by a wider community. That could be part of the framework. But more importantly, the framework, it should be flexible enough, but it should also be a living thing for people on the ground. It's not an abstract set of rules, but it is really, it should help you to think your own situation at the ground. And so I think there will be additional detail or granularity in inspiring, maybe look for maybe less conventional information sources on data. If you think about exposure, look at these and these and these and these and these and these data sources that are there. Are they available for your environment? And I do expect that maybe 50% of the regions will be really happy to work with what's already there. But another 50% of the regions will indeed get some new ideas from that framework, and it's for those regions, I think, where the framework could make a bit of progress.
Okay, thank you. So really bringing that context-specific dimension as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to have to move on, unfortunately. So thank you again, Bart. And if you don't mind checking the chat, the Q&A box rather, because we can answer questions by writing as well. And I'm going to hand over to Jeremy, but just encourage you all to keep using the Q&A to make up for the fact we have only limited time for discussions.
Thank you, Bart, for that excellent presentation. We just posted in the chat a few links that you want to check out if you can. Now we're going to move over to our panelists. We have 3 panelists today. We'll introduce them as they speak, and the questions will come at the end, and all the panelists will take the questions, including Bart. So let's start with Jeroen Aerts, who is a professor and the head of the Department of Climate and Water Risk at VU Amsterdam. As part of his work, he has developed and applied a wide range of assessment and modeling methods to analyze water risk and climate adaptation at local to global scales. Jeroen, please share your perspectives on the evolution of climate risk assessments, while at the same time say something about the role that advancements in Earth observations, computational capabilities, and improved understanding of vulnerabilities have played in this evolution. Again, to the participants, please post questions and comments in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end of all 3 of our panelists. Jeroen, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you very much for giving me the floor for a few minutes for this introduction. And what I have is a few slides to show what I have to say. Yeah. Do you see my screen? Is that okay?
We do not.
Not yet, no. Is everything okay?
Okay. Oh yeah, share. 1 second. Here we go. Now it should be there. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So just to continue what Bart was telling us. So what is a risk assessment? That's the first question I think what we have. And then I thought, let's go back 2 years ago when we had a big flood in Europe, in northwestern Europe. And what you see here is an image of a part in Germany. And suppose we have this CLIMAAX project and we have this big toolbox for the different authorities in Europe to do risk assessment. Also this village in Germany. So what do you want to know about this area? Well, what happened in this area is well known because a large part was actually flooded. And the big issue here was that large parts that were flooded were not expected to be flooded because the information for this area was not correct. And hopefully the CLIMAAX project can contribute to regional European authorities to provide better data. And to quickly go through a few examples of, well, quote unquote, better data or advancements in data for risk assessments. So let's take a little bit to the flooding risk assessment. So what you need, for example, is the height of the terrain. Now you want to know what are the deepest areas, what are the highest areas, where can we expect the floodwaters? And this is a new advancement in remote sensing technology. This is LiDAR data, data driven by laser altimetry, so-called. And what you see here is in part of New York. And this airplane or drone has made a digital image of the landscape, of the height of the buildings in New York. And for each square meter, there are 8 data points. It's a very high resolution. And how can you use that for flood risk assessment? Well, you can measure the height of the terrain. And if you know the height of the terrain, and you see that here depicted in gray, you can also overlay that with information about the floods. And then you know something about the expected flood depth. And if you know the flood depth, then you can say something about the most risky areas. And in this picture, you see that the most risky areas are on the left side, where you see the dark blue image of this flood simulation. But that's not all what we want to do. We also want to know who is affected by this flood. So where are the people living? So what we need to have is, and will collect in the CLIMAAX project, is information about where do people live. For example, by creating these population density maps. And what else can we do? Well, we can also look at where can we identify buildings that are vulnerable. And this is a nice example from Google Open Buildings database. They use satellite images, and they have an artificial intelligence algorithm which classifies and detects where the buildings are. And these informations you can combine. You can combine them into one risk assessment, where you see in this picture in the middle the flooding depths of a particular area, the lowest areas, and you overlay them with information of where the buildings and where the people are. And this is typically a simple example of a risk assessment that can be done, hopefully, with this new climate toolbox for all European regional authorities. And that's not all. We also go a little bit beyond that, and that's my final slide. We also want to know who is living there and what are the characteristics of those people. Are there more elderly population? What is the distance to health facilities, for example? All information which is actually now open source information. This example of the distance to health facilities is available through OpenStreetMap. It's an open source database. And CLIMAAX project is especially designed to collect all these different open source databases and make them available for regional climate risk assessments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that overview. And now we're going to move straight on to our next panelist. And again, a reminder, please use the question and answers box to ask questions to Jeroen. So we're now going to go to Veronica Casartelli. She's a senior researcher at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and she's focusing on disaster risk management and its interaction with climate change adaptation. And she's also worked previously for 17 years with the Italian Civil Protection Departments. So we're going to invite Veronica, if you could explain the role of peer review of risk management capabilities and their role for sharing knowledge and mutual learning. Thanks, Veronica.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot, Anna, and good afternoon. So the role of peer reviews of disaster risk management system, I think they represent an excellent opportunity for a country to reflect on its own disaster risk management system and gather collect insights from independent experts coming from other countries on good practices already in place, but also on areas for improvement. And of course, it's an excellent opportunity to collect a list of a very practical recommendation on how to fill in the gaps and how to improve the system to build resilience. So the overall objective of these peer reviews on disaster risk management systems is sharing of good practices and sharing of knowledge on disaster risk management among experts working on disaster risk management from different perspectives, and not only from a civil protection perspective. CMCC is currently supporting the European Union peer review program of disaster risk management and civil protection systems, which is run and funded by the European Commission, the General Directorate for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. And so far, within this program, 15 countries volunteered and for a review, which or comprehensive review on the whole disaster risk management system at a national level, or a thematic review, so focus on some specific aspect, for example, risk assessment. And now within the current program, which started in 2020, We have implemented and we have just finished to carry out a peer review in Romania, which was a thematic one on prevention and disaster risk governance. And we are currently working on the implementation of a comprehensive peer review of disaster risk management system in the Republic of Moldova. So I don't know how much familiar the audience is with this peer review process, but in a nutshell, just to give you an overview of on how it works. At the beginning of each peer review program cycle, the European Commission publishes a call for expression of interest for countries, asking countries that volunteer to be reviewed. After that, countries are selected and start a negotiation between the European Commission, the GECO, and the country in order to define the specific topics, the type of the review, and the objective that we would like to reach through with that specific review. After that, the profile of the expert needed for that specific review are defined, and the expert, so the peers, are selected. And then the peer review process started. So CMCC, as I said before, is the facilitator within this program. So we are taking care about the technical and administrative aspect of each peer review. And focusing on the technical part, we are supporting the peers in their preparation. So before the on-site mission, we prepare them by conducting a sound desk research in order to let them arrive to the implementation of the peer review analysis really well prepared. And as I just mentioned, within each peer review, an on-site mission is foreseen. So basically representatives from the European Commission, from CMCC in this case, and the peers, which might be a number of 4 or 6 peers, experts, are deployed in the host country, so in the country that are under review, and have the opportunity to discuss with stakeholders at different levels, working on disaster risk management system in the country. And during this meeting, this week of meeting, really busy meeting, they collect all the information needed to provide the list of good practices, the list of areas for improvement, and the list of recommendations that are included in the final report. This final report is then handed over by the Commission to the host country after the on-site mission. The expert and the countries can be from member states, participating states to the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, but also third country. So it's a really good opportunity to exchange good practices and knowledge with experts from different countries from Europe and beyond. And within this program, CMCC at the beginning of this cycle implemented and developed an assessment framework, an analytical assessment framework to support an implementation of a comprehensive peer review on disaster risk management system. So basically this framework is I can say a tool that guides the expert throughout the review, the analysis of disaster risk management systems. It's structured upon 7 key focus areas. So not only the 4 disaster risk management cycle phases, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery and review, but also disaster risk governance, risk assessment, of course, and risk management planning. We tested this framework during the last peer review in Romania, and it worked really well. It's a very flexible but comprehensive framework, analytical framework that can be easily adapted to different contexts. And just to mention that last year we also used a part related to risk assessment. So we took taking into account the part related to risk assessment of the framework, we adapted it to climate risk assessment, so to be also focused on not only on disaster risk assessment, but also to climate risk assessment. We adapted it to the local level, and we used this framework to conduct a review and analysis of how major cities in Italy are conducting climate risk assessment. So basically, say that Also, this tool might be really useful not only for the national level to conduct also self-assessment, but also to the regional and local level. Over to you, Anna. I just gave you an overview of peer reviews and their importance in exchanging of knowledge and the possible application also within this context of climate risk assessment at national and subnational level.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. Once again, please post your questions and comments in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end of the panel. Our next panelist is Dace Gale, who is the head of the climate division of the Latvian Environment Geology and Meteorology Center. She's one of the main climatologists in Latvia and has been expanding her areas of expertise into climate adaptation and climate risks. That's it. Can you explain how meteorological and climate services contribute to a better understanding of climate risks and to the driving of adaptation plans? The room is yours.
Yes, hello everybody. We are right now living in a quite difficult time because people have an access to a lot of information and a lot of data, but it's quite hard to know which data is the correct one and which one is the useful. So in my opinion, meteorological stations and services should be the ones that first of all have the correct data, and the data is open to a public, and also the data and information have to be user-friendly and useful, and it should be about, of course, climate change in the past and also in the future. And nowadays, I think that Meteo services, together with policymakers and also experts from different sectors, have to work together because we are the ones that should find out in which sectors, in which fields, and which locations should be focusing on the adaptation to the different kind of climate risks. Because there are often some kind of communication issues between us, like climate specialists and other people, because not everybody knows what is, for example, climate normal or reference period, and it's even harder for policymakers to understand climate models and what are the differences between different climate scenarios and how to use them to calculate, for example, vulnerability. And also in Latvia, we sometimes have some clients that are using our open data, but they have some kind of weird results after using our data. And we noticed that the reason why they have those weird results and illogical results are because in climatology we have some kind of rules, for example, rules that are based on the World Meteorological Organization, and we have some knowledge about our meteo stations that other people don't have, and also science about climate in general. And that's why there are sometimes some issues with other data analysts while they're working with our data, because they just don't know all of that knowledge. And to sum up all what I'm talking about, I think that meteo centers are the ones that should build some kind of tools to help policymakers and people from different kind of sectors to work with our data and to know that this data is the correct one, and this data is the one that should be used. And also the data have to be described easily so that not just scientists can understand the data, but also other people, also general public as well. So in my opinion, climate services is in a difficult task to develop a solid knowledge base in various types of algorithms that works in high quality, and then to communicate all the data to people that are not familiar to the climate field. And nowadays it is harder and harder because we also have to be a bit of a specialist in other fields, because we have to help other people to understand which are the sectors and how to foster adapt to the changing climate. And I started to work in climatology as data analyst, and I think data analysis has been and always will be one of the biggest parts in climatology. But nowadays we have to remember and understand that people and policymakers they don't need raw data. They want some kind of tools that shows them the patterns or trends and the concrete plans. I believe that is where climate services are heading right now. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very happy to be in this project, because in Latvia we are quite small and we don't have a lot of specialists in climate. And I think this project will help us to better jump into this new process called adaptation to climate change. So to sum up, climate services have to adapt not just to climate change, but also in this new reality where we have to understand what other people want and needs, and what policy makers really needs and want, because I think just working together we can help to slow down all the climate changes that's happening right now. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Dace, for that those insights and really explaining to us the motivation, I guess, for you to join the project, to be one of the pilot participants. So I guess a little bit like the super users of the Aspect project that we had this morning. So we have the chance now to have a couple of questions. I don't know if you'll want to switch your cameras on. Also, Bart, you're welcome to switch your camera back on as well. The idea here is to, feel free to jump in and with any additional comments or answering any questions. So I'll pick up one question first of all from the Q&A. So this is from Laurent, and he was appreciating your intervention very much, Veronica, and I think we all found that really fascinating, how the experience with disaster risk management could be highly transferable to assessing and improving climate risk assessment. And so Laurent is actually asking whether this approach of comprehensive peer review is planned for other natural or human-induced risks. So essentially what I just said, in a climate adaptation perspective. Do you want to share some thoughts?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Laurent, for the question. Just for the audience to know that we are working on the implementation development of a specific wildfire peer review assessment framework. So we are developing this framework for the European Commission, for DG ECO. We had an expert workshop last month. So we are also conducting a consultation process with the experts coming from different member states and participating states to the Union Civil Protection mechanism. And the aim is to have this specific assessment framework ready by mid of June, in order to be ready for the next wildfire season, and to have maybe some peer reviews specific on focus on wildfire this year or next year in 2024. Regarding the extension to other natural and human-induced hazards, of course, it can be done. We are thinking about this. For example, it would be really interesting to develop a flood peer review assessment framework, speaking from a climate adaptation perspective, as you just mentioned, Anna. And I think that we should not go into silos, but in developing this specific framework focus on different hazards, we should keep in mind that the the holistic approach is the best one. So yes, we can develop a specific assessment framework, but we should make some interactions, also think about how they can and should interact one with the others.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about evaluating flood risk assessments. I mean, this might speak to Jeroen, I guess, because of your experience. Do you have anything to add? Or I was actually going to ask you on your views to monitor progress and on adaptation using remote sensing observations, and perhaps considering, again, the flood example. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I have different thoughts. So first of all, I think we need to be comprehensive, as Veronica was saying. But I'm also interested in creating, let's say, with this project, a sort of uniform approach across Europe, so that we really can compare across cases. And maybe that's pertaining also to the word monitoring, what you were saying. Monitoring also means, let's say, looking across Europe and see if everybody has the same quality in the data risk assessments or climate risk assessments. And also, when people use the same methods, it is also easier to exchange data and to share experience, for example. The Latvian example, Dase told us that some people, they were busy with the data, but they had some problems with the data as well. They got weird results, as you were saying. So if we know that the neighboring country or neighboring municipality or regional authorities also doing the same assessment, they can learn from each other. And I think that's one of the purposes that we want to achieve with this common climate toolbox, is to supply authorities with generic approaches that are interchangeable and that are easy to access. We aim at using open data sources. And hopefully that also facilitates monitoring, because if people use open data sources and generic information, it's also easier to see the progress over time in terms of whether they can do risk assessments and hopefully also reduce risk. Lastly, monitoring adaptation is a little bit more difficult, I think, with remote sensing. With remote sensing data and with satellites, you can see, okay, you know, that you can model the terrain and you can see where the buildings are. You also can monitor where rivers are, but to see actually if people have implemented an adaptation measure, it's a little bit more difficult. There we really have to rely on also data from statistics and from policy documents, etc. So that goes a little bit beyond, I think, what we want to do here, although it is quite important to measure the progress of adaptation.
Okay, thank you very much. And while you were speaking, I was thinking again of what Bart said about standardized flexibility. This project is really struggling between two ends. On the one hand, helping to improve coherence in policy development, I suppose, and provide support to at all scales to really adhere to highest quality policy development. And then on the other, this contextual reality. And that's your example was brilliant to hear about. So we have time now for a break, unless anyone else would like to jump in before we maybe have a short break. I think the questions on the Q&A have been answered slowly, but if no one else wants to comment.
I had a couple of questions. I
Go ahead.
don't have much time, but one question I had for Datse was, we saw earlier today, I don't know if you attended the session, but we saw the project aspect, and it's dedicated to climate forecasts and the capacity to predict climate evolution using a seamless modeling framework from sub-seasonal to decadal scales. And we're wondering, in your work, do you use climate predictions, seasonal climate predictions, and do you think they should be part of this framework here that we're talking about in CLIMAAX?
I guess you mean like climate models and different climate scenarios, or?
At the seasonal time scale.
Okay, we are working right now actually with the SSP climate, new climate scenarios. I don't know if that's the same thing what we're talking about, but yeah, that we're using SSP climate scenarios and daily values. But we will have the results in seasonal way. So yeah.
And do you think they could be part of the CLIMAAX framework that Bart presented?
Yeah, that would be actually very, very good to have them in the CLIMAAX as well, because right now we are dealing with the issue that we don't have a global climate models, where we have a global climate models, but we don't have regional climate models. And the grid is, I guess you know how the grid looks like in global climate models, and it's very big, and it's sometimes like six grid cells for all Latvia, and it's not that good to talk about risk analysis when we don't have a better grid. So yeah, that would be good to have something better, and after the CLIMAAX project to have something better.
Okay, thank you. Yaron?
Yeah, to also address your question of whether seasonal forecasts would be interested, it depends also on the question of the users. So where are you using this climate risk information for? And I think you can distinguish between the long-term climate risk assessments, where a regional authority, for example, wants to see whether risk is increasing over time. And I speak then about decades, so 10 to 50 years perhaps. And then this information can be used to see if policies are needed. And seasonal forecasts are usually used for more the shorter term, to look at, for example, planting dates for crops by farmers, for example. They want to know if it'll be a wet season or a dry season, for example. And even shortened forecast, a 10-day forecast is more suitable for evacuation, for example, these kind of things. So it depends also a little bit of the users of what type of data should be there.
Okay, thank you very much for that discussion. We break now, and I suggest we come back at, well, it's very brief now, 3:05. Maybe we can make it 3:10. Should we make it 3:10 so you can get up and stretch? So see you back at 3:10.
Hi, my name is Paola Mercogliano and I work at the CMCC Foundation. Specifically, I am the leader of a regional model and geological impact. For many years, we develop climate services. We develop climate models, then we develop activity to assess the impact of climate change. And then we use all these data to provide information to the users. I think that it's very important when you develop a climate service to include the stakeholders in the process. Because first of all, we need to understand their objective, their needs, and then to prepare the data. But also, if we don't have this data, we need to define research that can support the reply, the answer to the needs of our stakeholders. For me, this was very relevant because we understood that we need to have more precise, more high resolution climate data. Perhaps now the goal is not only to know the evolution of the climate hazard, but also to take into account the relevance that vulnerability and exposure has on defining these climate services. Then I hope that in the next years, we will be more able to include also this knowledge in our climate services in order to provide the best information for stakeholders and to support in their decision.
So hello everyone, my name is Samuel Morin. I'm a research scientist in Météo France and CNRS in France. And together with my colleague Masa Kagayama from the LSE in Paris, we are co-chairing, we are co-directors of a new program at the national scale in France, addressing transformative advances in climate modeling and the development of climate services. This program is named TRACS, TRACCS. It is starting right now, early 2023, and it will last for 8 years. And it brings together the climate change community at the national scale from mostly Paris, Toulouse, and Grenoble, but with a number of other laboratories involved. And it brings the climate modeling community and the climate change study community, basically people contributing to working group 1 of the IPCC at the national scale, and bridging into the impacts with a number of other stakeholders and also other colleagues from other communities in scientific domains to further develop how we can better characterize climate change characteristics, but also impacts on a number of sectors and territories and environments and ecosystems. So we, of course, intend to establish strong links with Climate Europe too, because there are many things we can share and talk about in terms of how do we address uncertainties, how do we address the reliability of the climate services, some ethical principles that need to be strengthened, and also how to share best practices, best usage of data and information, and how we can best deliver the information in a way that can inform decision making at various scales, from very local scale up to national scale and perhaps even international scale, at European scale at least.
Hello, everyone. I am Alessandro Dell'Aquila. I'm a researcher in Enea, Italy, and I was part of the coordination team of the MedGold project on climate service for agriculture, in particular on durum wheat and pasta, grape and wine, and olive oil and olives. I bring my warm greetings to all the participants to this event, and I have a great expectation for the work that should be done in Climate Europe too. Because I think that the climate service is one of the most challenging arenas for the future of our science. And I think that the most important things for climate service is the interaction with users. The co-production environment for climate service is one of the most important things for climate service, and I think that we have to set all together a new paradigm for climate service, where user and providers could work together to build a new tailored service and something really useful for facing the climate crisis and the climate changes that we are experiencing in this period. So I think that you could do a very great job in this arena, and so best wishes for your work.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll slowly start up again the session.
Okay, we're gonna go to another Menti. Let's take some time now to ask you some questions interactively, which will be very helpful for the CLIMAAX project. The first question is to list the barriers to conducting local and regional climate risk assessments. And if Anna, the two of us can then try to summarize these together, that would be great.
Yeah, these questions are more orientated around the topics of interest of CLIMAAX. And so your views here are going to be really interesting. We'll be saving these.
And by the way, you can list as many answers as you like. So just put one in at a time, submit, and then you can put another one in. Another thing is we'd like to try to make this word cloud work a little better, and we'd like, so if you see a word there that's similar to what you put in, please put the word as it's spelled on the screen. For example, somebody might write uncertainties, and we have uncertainty already there. So if you just write uncertainty instead of uncertainties, that would be great.
And certainly comes up. Yeah, in some respects, there's a lot of similarity with some of the responses this morning in the session we had this morning. So issues around uncertainty, challenges in using the data because they're homogeneous or too low resolution, also as Data was saying, and knowledge is a barrier. So climate literacy is something that we always have to keep contributing to improving.
Yeah,
But
so
lack of data is really there in the center.
Yeah, it is. And then it seems interesting that local resources is coming up as well in there.
Yeah.
And then also
lack of data. Yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that this is in a way good for this project to be essentially addressing that to some extent. I mean, the way it will work will be connecting to many of the resources that are there, that are out there. So hopefully addressing a little bit, through the toolbox approach, the business of accessing data. But local resources as well. Maybe this is something that resonates with the funding that it's actually been managed by means of CLIMAAX. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment, Bart, if you've got any reaction since you're there, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a bit funny that the lack of data is so outstanding, while Daci was saying that there's actually maybe too many data. That was maybe a lack of decision support to decide what kind of data are actually useful.
Yeah,
that's maybe a more prominent. But now I'm filling out the barriers that of course other people should bring in. But I'd like to discuss that topic. Maybe Daci can comment on that as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I was interpreting that as an access problem, but it'd be nice to unpack that. If anyone wants to comment.
It's more like an overview or a logic or a selection criteria problem. But access is definitely also an issue. That I agree.
This is good from Andreas. Thanks, Andreas. It's not the climate data, but the complementary data locally, needed locally.
That's also important, yeah.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And Nevis, I think, is agreeing with you. It's more the knowing what is the correct data to be used, so criteria to choose. That's exactly what you were just saying, but okay. Well, this has been interesting. If no one else wants to chime in, we maybe move to the next question.
Maybe Daci wants to say something.
Yeah.
Daci, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe why there is lack of data here that big, because there isn't. Sometimes there is an issue about a lot of, for example, different kind of climate scenarios. Nobody understands which scenario to use to see future climate. Like our policymakers want to use just one climate scenario, but that's it. But we need more data, more stations, because not like future climate data more, but past climate data more. So I guess that this lack of data is like more data from the past to understand better resolution of the data. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but I guess that's one of the reasons why lack of data is here.
Yeah, and then within those, there's low resolution data, data availability. We have all sorts of issues there. Lack of data and damages, perhaps. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you for this feedback.
We'll move on to the next one, but I just wanted to point out that vulnerability is coming up there quite a bit, and that's interesting and promising as well. Let's see if we can move to the next slide, and the slide is not advancing, so let me end the show for a second.
So from I guess a more positive question, here we're asking you, what are the enablers to help your region or community or the stakeholders that you're working with, if you have experience on what really enables adequate or appropriate preparation and planning for climate resilience, to build climate resilience. So here we go, knowledge. Let's see what comes back. The importance of communication, building knowledge and awareness.
Opportunities.
Highlighting the opportunities, seeking more commitment and leadership, vision. So these are really fantastic suggestions here or information. I wonder if anyone else wants to write in the chat if you have any good examples, or if you'd like to, from the panelists, from Bart, anyone else would like to comment on some good examples, for example, with regards to partnership building or on around the issues of leadership. This would be really interesting to hear more about.
And we also have plans and standards. Which, interesting.
I mean, a political will and leadership is certainly an important enabler.
Yeah.
Bart?
Yeah, I witnessed a small pitch from the IPC co-chair working group 2 this week from Hans Otto Pöttner, and he was indeed also calling that the scientific evidence should actually promote the societal will to act. That in many cases it's not really the knowledge itself, but it's more the convincing power of that knowledge that we need to pay attention to. That were his words, and I liked it, and I also share that observation that in many cases there's quite a lot of evidence that something needs to be done, but that there is quite a lot of reluctance to pick it up. And yeah, I think partnership, that's I think a very good notion to put that in the center, because that's also the experience that we have, that active, say, science policy interfaces or good, partnership that have some duration, that get some time to build up, and then we're talking about years rather than months. That is really helpful, because there's a lot of trust is needed for solid cooperation and commitment. Yeah, and trust takes time.
Right.
And reiteration of interactions.
Yeah, solid partnerships. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely a good discussion this, and also quite difficult to have one answer to, what enables your region to prepare better than other regions or than now. From my experience, I can also say that people sometimes don't really understand what climate resilience exactly is, or climate adaptation for that matter. And often what happens is when you're going to sit down together, it in fact appears that people are already adapting, and every day people modify their landscape or invest in new infrastructure or build new buildings or whatever, maybe restore nature. And what you then see is that the only extra step that you need to do is to make sure that whatever you do right now is also sustainable and resilient on the longer term. So what you need to do then is include long-term information and use that information to prepare your investments and to become more resilient and more sustainable. And that step that takes time. And some people think that they have to do something completely new, which is not the case. They need to incorporate more this long-term perspective and this long-term risk and climate information in their daily thinking. That takes time, and that takes a lot of thinking. But if you take that bridge, then well, a lot of things are possible, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeroen. I mean, it sounds like the way CLIMAAX is framed is going to be helpful, addressing these challenges and helping these enabling conditions. So that's been encouraging to see. So now, should we move on, Jeremy, for sake of time.
Yes.
I think this was a good discussion, but perhaps we need to get going.
Let me just get the screen sharing here. We have the call for evidence page here. And
Yeah.
in part, maybe you want to be part of this discussion as well, and perhaps you're on as well, since you're part of the project. But we have the call for evidence. This is the web page that was just launched today. Maybe Anna, if you want to take us through this, and we can open up for questions if possible, or if there's not enough time, we can move on to the next session.
Yeah. So just to flag that CLIMAAX is really aiming to work at different scales within the sort of the regional, city level or community level, on the one hand, to understand their needs to implement and to enable their implementation of climate risk assessment. And on the other hand, there's going to be a process to try and consult with stakeholders how the CLIMAAX framework and toolbox have been developing all along the process. And so the approach that's being used by CLIMAAX is to implement a community of practice, and it will connect both climate service providers and also users and stakeholders. And it's not reinventing the wheel, it's really building a stronger cohesion around the existing activities, access to existing activities, and using existing relevant networks. So the first activity that we're doing in this kind of consultative mode with our partners and stakeholders is this call for evidence. So Bart has already introduced this, and the website was just launched. But next few days there'll be a sort of communication and divulgation about this information. You'll be hearing more about this. What CLIMAAX is doing is inviting stakeholders to contribute information that isn't necessarily in the peer-reviewed literature. So from different stakeholders, work that's been published in reports, in what we might call grey literature, not in the peer-reviewed literature, but we're really hoping to access this knowledge, experience, and we're looking for information on the application of different principles and guidance documents, or the use of standards and different frameworks when applied in these different regional and local scales across Europe, but also beyond, and also for different scopes and purposes. So we really invite you on the call to join this as well, and we're sort of looking for really diverse sources. So like regional or local case studies, as I was saying, things like policy reports, or if there have been some commissioned assessments that are available. So just the kind of information that's not so easily accessible through the scientific bibliographic databases, for example. And any language is welcome from the European Union. Bart, I don't know if you want to comment at all.
No, the call is clear. I'm wondering. So, what would I could imagine that people will say, yeah, what's in it for me if I would submit some of that information? It is a bit of an effort. You need to sort out some information, but indeed, it could help to well, on one hand to share knowledge across many participants in this whole process. And of course it can help the formulation of a good framework, and probably it also helps to sort of stratify your own ideas and experiences with these risk assessments that you did in the past. So if you would ever feel a need to sort of document what you did, or to go back to, say, critical decisions that you did, yeah, this is a good way to steer that documentation process by filing it or submit it to this call for evidence. So yeah, it's probably more than just an altruistic act to contribute to this. I think there's also a benefit for yourself in participating in this.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bart. And it's, I guess, the sort of a core approach of using a community of practice mode or principle, where it's a collective effort of mutual learning and sharing experiences, particularly given the diversity of contexts and experiences that exist out there. Yeah. So moving swiftly on, unless there are questions, but maybe we can take them in writing on the question and answers box. Jeremy, I'm going to hand over to you for the next
Okay.
part.
We have the same problem with advancing the slides, so let me just get those going. We're going to shift on over to the cascading funds now. And we have a speaker here. Let's see, is my screen being shared right now?
Not yet. Something's not connecting. Hi, Erika.
Okay.
Do you want to put it in presentation? Yeah, great.
Yeah, Bart mentioned cascading funds and his the overview of CLIMAAX, and we have here Erika Melendez, who's going to tell us about how these work. Erika works at the Center of Applied Research and Hydrometeorology at the Polytechnic University of Catalonia in Barcelona. In CLIMAAX, she'll be closely managing these funds. So Erika, if you could share with us how these funds will be managed by CLIMAAX and how the regions and cities can benefit from these funds. And also if you could show us a roadmap for launching the call for the funds. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, hello, everyone. My name, as Jeremy said, is Erika. I'm representing CRI, the Center of Applied Research in Hydrometeorology, and we are partners within the CLIMAAX project, and we are part of the management team that will be working with the cascading funds. So Bart already introduced the cascading funds at the beginning of this session, so I'll try to be brief and not too repetitive. But we thought it was important to have a moment to talk about what is this cascading fund mechanism, how do we think it can support communities and regions, and most importantly, to highlight the application windows in case someone here present is interested in applying or knows about a region or community that might be interested in applying. So hopefully you can spread the word if that is the case. But to start, as Bart already mentioned, CLIMAAX, the project CLIMAAX aims at proposing a climate risk assessment framework and supporting toolbox to either improve or develop the regional climate and emergency risk management plans. So the idea would be that communities and regions can have access to the toolbox and the framework that we are currently developing within CLIMAAX to support climate change adaptation within this climate emergency that we're currently experiencing. So this is the idea, but how within the project in CLIMAAX we intend to achieve this? How are we going to reach these communities and regions? And as it was said before, one of the main pillars in CLIMAAX is this cascading fund mechanism. So through this cascading fund mechanism, we are hopefully going to reach more than 50 regions and communities that will have access to financial support that will help them improve or develop their climate and emergency risk management plans. This based on the framework and the toolbox that will be proposed by CLIMAAX. So the idea would be that we can have a long-lasting impact, reach as many communities as possible so they can use the methodology and the toolbox that are currently implemented in CLIMAAX, and having the financial support through this cascading fund mechanism. This is the idea. And how are we going to reach this more than 50 regions or communities, or how are we going to select them? This is going to be done through the applications, the 2 open calls that we are currently being prepared within CLIMAAX. As explained before, the first call will be launched later this year from October to November. We're going to have the selection outcome at the beginning of next year, so 2024. And the second will be launched from the beginning of next year, from January to March. And the idea of having 2 calls is, first of all, as it was mentioned before, if we identify that there's some gaps that we haven't truly addressed, we can change this and modify the second call to address this. Or if in the first application, there are some regions or communities that were not successful with their application, or they have something that they have to revise, they have a second opportunity in order to make this whole process more inclusive. So because within the CLIMAAX project, we want to have a lasting impact and support as many regions and communities as possible, we are going to make sure that all interested applicants have the support and guidance needed to have a successful application. And of course, if granted the financial support within the execution of the fund, there will be mentorship and guidance on how to make executable plans of what they have been proposed in their application. So this is a brief general introduction of what the Cascading Fund is within the CLIMAAX project. This is the pathway or the mechanism that we have chosen within the project that we believe can help us reach a wide network of community and regions that can update or develop their climate risk assessment with the most updated and innovative tools and methodologies coming from the collaborative effort of the CLIMAAX partners. And in the long run, this can help with the climate change adaptation, which is one of the main objectives of the CLIMAAX project. So to summarize, there's two main important things that have to be taken into account from now, is that if there's any interested regions and communities that want to apply through this Cascading Fund mechanism, there will be two open calls, one at the end of this year and the other one at the beginning of next year. There will be opportunities, wide opportunities for application. And of course, because this is an official call, all the information will be posted in the funding and tenders portal. And of course, also in the CLIMAAX website. We are preparing the platform, so you can have all the information there. Regarding the eligibility criteria, the application process, and all these details that are too extensive to talk about it right now, we are foreseen to have webinars and how to apply info days when all this information is going to be shared. Right now, we don't have the detailed date for when this will happen, but we will make sure to update this in our media channels. So keep an eye on those. And you will have certain opportunities, more than one, to have all your questions answered in case you want to apply, or you know about certain community region that might be interested in accessing the financial support that is being managed within CLIMAAX. We believe that this is a good opportunity to support, in general, these regions within the climate change scenarios that we're currently experiencing. This is from my part. I hand back to you, Jeremy.
Thanks so much, Erika. I was wondering, but before I ask the question, please post questions in the Q&A, and we're going to, after we speak with Erika, we have a little bit more time to speak to all of our panelists as well as Bart. So the five of us will be, or the five of them will be available for some Q&A until the end of the session. But I was curious, Erika, exactly, can you specify, give a little more details on how the selection of the regions is going to be made? The whole process there and the selection process?
Well, within the project, within the Cascading Fund mechanism, we're going to have several ways in order to address what Bart was saying before, in order to be more inclusive, and then we take into account developing regions. I cannot go into detail right now because I don't have it here at hand, but we will make sure that we are able to get also entities that are considered vulnerable, and more detail on this will be known. We will publish in the website and the call once we have it.
Okay, so I'm curious a little bit about the criteria. Maybe Bart, if you have some more information on that, what will be the key criteria in terms of this, in terms of selecting the regions?
Yes, there's, yeah, indeed, I need to do it by heart, but there is a couple of some kind of technical criteria, and that is more like eligibility of applications, and that is about what kind of organization is asking for it. Do they have indeed a mandate? Is there some kind of a legal authority? Is there a financial administration present? But that's more like a technical criteria. For the rest, the content criteria is basically the scope can be quite wide. We just got a question in the Q&A about whether it would be possible to have just a regional energy authority to apply, and the answer is yes. If it's climate related or extreme weather related, that could also be extreme civil protection kind of scopes. That is all within scope, but there is a selection about feasibility of the risk assessment. So the applicant has to provide some kind of a plan for the risk assessment. So a bit of a description of the purpose and the scope and the also a bit of the time planning. And we will check whether the feasibility is there. If there is information, if a risk assessment is actually embarking on reducing uncertainty on sea level rise in 2100, that is probably not a feasible call, because that is probably scientifically not feasible. So that kind of check will be there. But for the rest, I think the scope is pretty open. Climate risk is of course an enterprise that is reaching so many, say, business and policy domains, and we wouldn't exclude one of them. We do keep in mind, though, that there is, in the mission formulated by the European Union, there's also a desire to close the gap between countries and regions that have, a sophisticated expertise level, versus countries that really have a lower capacity to cope with these. And we really want to give preference to those regions where the support can make the largest difference. So we might even give preference to more, I would call it, say, elementary risk assessments that really start from a very basic level over really very advanced risk assessments that are topping up information that's already there and that is already pretty sophisticated. But that I wouldn't call that a criterion for, say, the intake, but it is a criterion for the portfolio at the end. That we want to give advantage or preference to those regions that have the best papers to really get a proper benefit of the call. Yeah, and then on the evaluation, where you were calling before, we have sort of a staged evaluation. So there's first a technical feasibility check by Funding Box, the organization that is actually executing the call. Then there is this feasibility evaluation by internal experts in the project team. And then we make a ranking that is first proposed to an evaluation committee, where there is also people from GRC and the mission secretariat. They are there as an observer to look at that ranking. And then we ask for a final confirmation or a consent with this European Union Civil Protection Mechanism to also get endorsement that our selection and also the spread of the applications is indeed representing, member states properly. But that will all be written down in the call for proposals. And also the criterion procedure of the selection procedure and selection criteria are written down in pretty much detail in that call. And that call will come out, I think, in August this year. So I say by heart is my memory.
That's extremely useful information. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jorge Paz in the chat, and I know you just answered some of these, but it says, what is the funding for? Can the regions hire experts on CRA, tender risk assessments? May I understand the idea is to use the CLIMAAX tools, methods, and etc.
Yes, yes. The funding is indeed to do the execution of the CRA. So as I indicated before, we expect regional authorities to apply and then spend the money on consultants hired for the job. That I think is it. On the use of the CLIMAAX toolbox, that is offered, but if the CRA proposal plan has an incredible business case by using just only local information that's already available, or global information that is well available to the applicant. There is no need to use the CLIMAAX toolbox. It's really designed to be an assistant, but it's not strictly necessary. Although the framework, and we would like to stick to some basic elements of the framework that will probably contain a couple of guidelines on making a risk assessment that is in some way comparable to other risk assessments. And so the use of a totally privately owned and generated and isolated data set is probably not going to pass the feasibility criteria.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Anna, do we have any more questions? Do you have any questions you want to ask, or does anybody else have questions to ask?
Not in the chat, but I wonder if everyone would like to switch their cameras back on. And we've just got a little while, a few moments we can spend as a full group with our invited guests. So I had a question actually. I don't know if Bart or others would like to respond. It sort of picks up on one of the things that came out of the Mentimeter exercise, where awareness and understanding and communication were sort of either, if they could be enablers to really enhance the uptake and use of climate risk assessment approach more transversely in regional and local communities. And we heard also some of the sessions earlier this, possibly today or yesterday, on the concept of storylines and using storylines to better communicate what may happen and how it can affect different communities, different activities. Is the storyline approach something that's relevant for CLIMAAX? And maybe do you have any examples that that could serve, as a basis for thinking about how storylines can be used to frame and communicate climate risk?
Yes, I think that there's definitely so in the framework that is being designed, that the role of, say, scenarios and storylines and data and evidence from past historic events, they will all find a place. I think a very good example of a storyline is for instance stress testing of civil protection response capability, where you typically take an extreme case, extreme condition, and you make some kind of a perturbation to it to maybe make it represent a different climate setting, or where you put a downburst that hit one city, you put it on your own city to look at what would my emergency response look like if that event would fall in our case. That's a very typical example of a storyline, and which is currently already used for stress testing and training of emergency response, but also stress testing the design of adaptation measures like water management or water protection infrastructure or water resource infrastructure. So I think that's a very complementary role of storylines or stress test conditions to complement the, say, more risk-based or probability-based optimization kind of information sources.
Maybe Joran, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So far, we I think talked about the type of information that comes in the toolbox and the quality of the data and how we do quality assurance in this kind of things. And then indeed, this is a question pertaining to, how do we communicate it? How do we communicate risk information? And again, it also depends a little bit on the user. So you have more the technical users who are used to work with spatial data, for example, and also temporal data. So that is data over time. But if you talk about policymakers who are not always have this technical background, then indeed the storyline approach is very relevant. And for those who don't know the storyline approach, it's basically telling a story. If you tell a story to your neighbor, a nice anecdote, for example, this neighbor will remember this anecdote because it is a nice story. But if you talk to your neighbor and begin to convey data, well, this neighbor cannot comprehend this data. And indeed, what we have noticed in research is that if you talk to people about climate change, the simplest way to communicate climate change is to think backwards to a recent extreme event, a recent drought, a recent flood, a recent hailstorm, for example. And then try to communicate and talk a little bit further. Well, suppose this hailstorm or this drought will be twice as big as in the past. What will happen then? That is a storyline, because it is telling a story about this event. And this is a nice way, I think, of communicating of risk information. And definitely we want to include that also in the CLIMAAX toolbox.
Well, thank you very much for that. I don't know if Date or Veronica, you have any views on this, because on the one hand, Veronica, you're working with policymakers and different agencies on the ground assessing what their work is like. And Date, you have experience in your country trying to encourage the uptake of this information and two different perspectives, and whether storylines could be something useful in your work.
Yeah, of course, I agree with Bart and Jörn. I think it could be really useful to adopt this approach. It can really help in bridging the gaps between science and policy, because I think it can be a really useful tool to start to talk to each other, to understand each other in order to enhance the system. And just one note, when I think it's really useful to test, to make some stress test, as Bart was mentioning, of civil protection capacities. But we should keep in mind that civil protection is not only response. So a stress test also for measure for preparing for, responding to, and recovering from. So civil protection covers all phases of disaster risk management cycle, and storylines could be really useful for us to better be prepared for, to better manage and to better recovery from climate-related disasters. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in my opinion, this is actually one of the hardest jobs. What we have to do is to communicate those climate data to the policymakers, and it's not easy. And for now in Latvia, we have a big struggle in this, and I guess in the CLIMAAX we will find out some ways how to better communicate with the government. So,
yeah, thank you for that. And just as a final question, going back to right at the beginning of the event, Jeremy, you were introducing mission adaptation. And so I was curious your views on how the work that will be done in CLIMAAX in really helping on the ground the implementation and development of new policies and climate risk assessment. How do you think it can contribute to the sort of the larger vision of developing preparedness at the European scale and sort of fulfilling the ambition of the mission, including to prepare for disruptive events related to climate change, for example, and other factors? Do you have any thoughts going back to the large scale, so going back out at the European policy level? No inspiration there.
Maybe I can extend the question a little bit
Yeah.
too. So we're talking about the mission and this specific objective that CLIMAAX is trying to meet is preparing and planning for climate resilience in these communities. And so at the end of the project, maybe these communities are prepared, and have planned, but how are we going to ensure that they continue along their journey into climate resilience? Is there any mechanism in place for that?
Yes, there is a couple of projects that address uptake of climate risk information into policy planning or into more dedicated infrastructure planning, for instance. The specific projects have been launched for that as well. We have been asked in this call to produce climate risk assessment information that can feed into these policy processes, and we align with the projects there, but we also, of course, rely on the expertise that many of the consortium partners have with earlier risk assessments and their role into shaping policy agendas. So we do not entirely rely on the set of projects that are currently being issued in the mission scope. This is every call is actually building up a big legacy and is also going to contribute to an upcoming legacy. So we don't take it too narrow. Yeah, and also there, I think, coming back to Anna's first question on how it matches up with the big emission, yeah, it's also standardized flexibility. I think internally we have discussed the options that out of the, say, if we fund 60 applications, that if we have 25 or 30 excellent, risk assessment that really make a step forward in the understanding of risk, and also have a very clear picture of how that indeed is inspiring upcoming policy at a regional level, that is of course contributing to a collection of success stories. But it's not a guarantee that the European Union as a whole is getting in resilience, but I think it matches the goal that we want to promote the resilience improvement at the local level. And we will be very happy if we can harvest, like in that order of magnitude, success stories. We also are aware that risk assessment is also not a project. This is, this is also a practice rather than a project. And for some regions, it takes decades to really have a proper understanding of all your, and it's a moving target with this climate change going ahead. So it's also a process that is never finished. So I think we also shouldn't be trapping into the trap that this is, has a number of KPIs that need to be accomplished after this call is finished. We do document experience with these risk assessments in a dedicated work package, also for the purpose of, bringing it further to practice. The mission is also thinking about next steps, how to promote or how to have a structural support for regions to do this risk assessments. That cannot be done by a research project. It has to be done in an infrastructure that is maybe provided by the GRC Risk Data Hub or by the European Environmental Agency, or as an extra note in the Copernicus program. That has to be consolidated in a stage afterwards. So I think I would be very happy if we have two handful of very successful success stories. And if we have a good picture of how this can be more a structural support for regions, and then I think we have met the goal of this project, but it's part of a larger process. And that process with this climate state that we are in, and the rate at which we can see a change, it's going to stay a while with this whole process, the risk assessment itself.
Thank you very much, Pat. Joren, you're going to compliment, and over to you.
Yeah, no, very briefly. I mean, what we definitely will not do is make sure that Europe is climate proof after 4 years. So yeah, that's not what we are going to do. Yeah. But I think your question and about the legacy is important. So how do we make sure that when this project ends, that there's a legacy? That's because what we want is that, we create this toolbox full of information available for risk assessments, also beyond of the time of the project, right? And for that, indeed, what Bart was saying, we need success stories. We need examples of users who have used this information and show other users how to do that. So this interlearning is really important. So I think what we have to do is, except for the technical aspects, so how does the website look like, where can you retrieve data, etc. That should be okay. But it is also about the whole learning process and creating a community, which is as important, I think, as this technical aspect. And well, I do have some ideas on that, and we do, but that is still a big task for us to do, because if we create this community, at least, form the first stepping stone for that, then the legacy of the project is also ensured, I think.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for ending on the note of the community of practice that the project wishes to build. I hope our wonderful audience that was hitting over 80 people is interested and keen to join. We listed the social media information in the chat again. And I think it's a really nice characteristic of this project that rather than having some external independent advisory board, the way it will consult and receive feedback will be through a community-led process, community-driven process. So more information coming soon. You'll be receiving this information. I hope you'll join, and we'll share this dialogue of experiences and work towards these positive outcomes that we've just been talking about. So I think that's it from us. We want to thank our wonderful panelists and speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. That was a really nice discussion as well. And just to remind you of the call for evidence that we showed you earlier on, please do take the time to think about what you could submit and contribute. And then that's it. I think we have to be back at 4:45. Am I right? What time do we have to be back?
Yes,
for
you're
the?
right, Anna.
Is that right? Thank you.
Yes, for the
for the closing plenary. So that's all from me. I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to say something, but I just want to thank you all for participating.
Yeah, I just want to second that and thank our panelists and our speakers and everyone for attending. I think this was a very good session, and I think the outcomes of it will be very important for the success of the project.
Spread the word.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.